Reinvention isn't about changing your life. It's about upgrading the internal operating system that's running it. Because what's typically taught is a new technique, a new way, a new method, a new procrastination technique that can allow you to focus more or to cut down your time in terms of getting things done, your productivity, right? All these different things that are really just kind of bandages and the very surface level. You can always learn about different ways to increase your productivity, different ways to help you focus, different ways to get things done faster, quicker, more efficient, right? But at the end of the day, if the identity isn't in the right place, isn't where it needs to be, and that you see yourself as this person who doesn't procrastinate, doesn't need a technique, a habit, or whatever it may be to get things done, then you're going to stay in the same place. No matter how much you try to set new goals, no matter how much you try to set new objectives, right? Have your New Year's resolution or whatever that may be, you're always going to continue to operate the same way because what's really operating behind the scenes and unconsciously is your identity. So very, very important to keep in mind that all these different techniques, all these different habits, all these different things that you can try to do, and maybe in the beginning it's working for a bit, right? Maybe the first 30 days of a new habit, you're very consistent, but then after a while, you start to kind of die down and, essentially get the understanding that, man, I can't continue doing this because it just doesn't feel right or there's a lot of friction. It's because there's misalignment within the identity. Because you don't rise to your goals, you rise to the level of your identity. So let's talk about why you need to reinvent yourself and how to go about it. You see, because every single one of us hits an identity ceiling, a point where the old version of us simply cannot create the next level. Our current identity is the template that we're currently using to really exist and to show up in the external world, right? Because our internal world and how we view ourselves, how we see ourselves in reality, how we relate to others, that is how we're going to show up in the real world. And so one of the things that I really invite you to do is to just acknowledge and become aware of how you're actually being, right? Just sit back, reflect on how you're showing up in the world, right? Just even think of yourself as the third person, right? Take yourself out of yourself and observe yourself from a third person perspective and notice how you interact with others, how you show up in the world, how you communicate, and then look at the patterns that are happening. How are you showing up? Are you coming across very confrontational? Are you warm? Are you empathetic? Are you understanding? That's what you really need to understand at this point, is just like, what is my current state? How am I showing up to others, to myself? And that is what is going to give you a really good baseline to understand where you're at so that you can see all the patterns, all the loops, the cycles, so that you can make the proper adjustments to update and upgrade your current identity to where you really want to be, right? Who you really want to be. Because the current life that you have right now is serving an existing identity. The breakthrough, the higher version, the best version of yourself, right, is at that new identity level. And so in order for you to be able to achieve that new identity unlock, you have to think in that way. You have to think in that identity's perspective. What would they be doing, right? How would they be acting? And that first comes with the understanding of what is your current identity doing? And then being able to understand, okay, the future identity, this is what they're doing. This is how they're viewing the world. This is how they're showing up. And once you start to embody that and understand that, then you start to move yourself closer to that identity, right? But first becomes the awareness. Understand where you're at, what you're going through, how you're showing up to the world, and that should be your baseline for understanding what you need to do to move to the next level. There are 3 loops that keep people trapped in the old version of themselves. So let's go over each one individually. So the first loop, you need to understand your mind, your thoughts, okay? Loop 1, thoughts. Okay. This is really important here because you need to understand that everything that is going on in your current life is a direct reflection of how you've grown up, your belief system, the story that you've been telling yourself that you are a certain way and this is the way that it's always been. So you need to understand that there's a constant loop that is always playing in your mind, and that is all through the conditioning, the pre-existing conditioning that you have gone through all your life, right? It all starts at a very young age with your family, with your mother, your father, right? Them teaching you certain ways of thinking, right? Maybe certain limiting beliefs that you have in terms of money, abundance, access, whatever that may be, right? There's that reoccurring story that you keep telling yourself. And in order for you to break out of that, first you need to become aware of it, right? What is the story that you're telling yourself? And what does that say about you? Is it empowering you or disempowering you? So becoming aware of that and acknowledging this, right, is really the first step to really becoming aware of what's going on, right? What's the cycle that's happening in my life? And here's the unfortunate part, that most of this is very limiting self-concept, right? This loop that you have going through is often in a negative manner, right? It's limiting your beliefs about who you are, about what you can achieve because of your family's never been able to do it, or you don't know others who've been able to do it, or hey, this person over here got lucky and they got rich or whatever. That is all what you need to become aware of and understand, and just look at it objectively. Hey, it is what it is, right? And then loop number 2. Emotional loop. So the emotional loop is something that is really important in terms of how you're processing the information, the data that's coming in, right? You have your loop of data that's coming in terms of how you are interpreting the reality, the world that you are seeing around you, and the beliefs and all that you have. The emotional side of things is how you're avoiding things, right? When something comes up, do you actually face it head on, or do you essentially put it to the side, go out and have fun and party and try to avoid it? So avoidance just creates more of it, right? Because yeah, you can escape for a day or so or 3 or 4 hours, but you got to come back to reality. Then there's the fear of change, right? You think about it. Anytime that you're going through a particular situation and you need to move into a new scenery, a new environment, all of that is going to cause a lot of friction, a lot of emotion, a lot of fear, uncertainty, right? But that is all part of the process. You need to be able to acknowledge and understand what you're going through. And keep in mind, emotions are very, very important, okay? If you're feeling fear, if you're feeling uncertainty, if you're feeling sad, whatever it may be, it's important to feel those emotions and look at those emotions from the lens of them being like a little child. So instead of getting upset at them, getting mad with yourself, look at those emotions like a little child that needs to be seen, that needs to be acknowledged, right? So that you can separate yourself from those feelings, okay? But they're very, very important, right? Emotion is one of the main driving forces of your identity, right? When you can really understand that emotions are just part of the game, part of the process. They're not good, they're not bad. It's really about the label that you attach to them, right? But understanding the patterns of your emotions, how you're feeling, how you're processing things is very, very important to be able to understand these loops, right? And acknowledge them and, be able to understand that, hey, it's just part of the process. And then loop number 3, this is your environment, okay? This is the people that you hang around with, okay? This is the loop that keeps, consistently happening, right? The people that you're around with, the people that you associate yourself with, it's really one of those things where if you hang around winners, you're going to become a winner. If you hang around losers, then guess what? You're going to be a loser, right? So this whole loop about your environment, about what you're consuming, right? What you're taking in, what are you listening to? Are you listening to podcasts? Are you listening to the news, watching the news, and having the news and the media create fear and uncertainty, and get you to be worried about the state of the world and all of that. You need to be consuming content and being around people that are positive, that are uplifting, that are going to meet you where you are. And sometimes, you know what? Sometimes it's probably the best thing for you to do is just get away from it all, right? Remove yourself from negative situations, right? I remember myself growing up, very large Hispanic Mexican family, but there was a time where I needed to just get out of my family's area, out of the location, move out of state, and just get away from it all, because then you're able to reestablish yourself with new ideas, new beliefs, new identities, so that you're not constantly going back and trying to fit an old narrative, or trying to be around people that are bringing you down, because people are rooting for you to become successful and to do big things, but oftentimes they don't want to see you do better than them. And that's the unfortunate thing, right? Because then there becomes this question between themselves and of themselves of like, what am I doing with myself, right? Why is so and so, John or Jane, or whatever the individual may be, why are they having this level of success and I'm not? So in the beginning, when you're trying to make things happen, oftentimes you'll have people trying to help, or hey, you can do it, you can make it happen. But then after a while, once you start actually achieving success, it's interesting how the energy shifts, and everything adjusts to where it's like they don't really know how to express themselves, right? Or it's more of like, hey, you should be careful, you should don't risk so much, right? Think about before you do anything. It could be XYZ can happen. So it's really about the environment, who you're hanging around with, the people that are in your vicinity, and the content and the information that you are intaking on a daily basis. Super important, because you're not trapped by your potential. You're trapped by your identity's loyalty to your past. Okay, so let's talk about how we can upgrade our identity. So we talked about the loops, right? What is going on, how we are experiencing these loops, and what essentially is going on at this level. Okay, this is the unconscious level. This is essentially how it's always been, always thinking about things in terms of the current state, right? So now we want to talk about how do we upgrade. So let's talk about upgrading the identity 1.0. Okay, 1.0. So point number one, okay? Point number one is you can't change what you refuse to observe, okay? What you refuse to observe, okay? And this is why I mentioned to become aware, right? You need to become aware of what's going on in your mind, how you're processing all these different data points that are coming into your mind. This is where you are looking at everything objectively. You're looking at the identity in terms of the actions, the inputs, the patterns, the structure of your thinking. Are you thinking positively? Are you thinking in terms of somebody who can make things happen, who can achieve, who can actually get things done, right? So this part is really just about becoming aware of the patterns, of the structure of it all, of what's going on, how you're processing it, and looking at everything objectively, right? Because you can't fix something that you don't really understand and acknowledge it for what it is, right? You think about somebody who's going through an addiction, right? The first step with any type of addiction resolution, right, is acknowledging that you have a problem. And this is where we are acknowledging our current state. Like, how are we thinking? What are the patterns? Are we constantly thinking negative? Are we constantly showing up in a negative manner to our friends, our family, to our coworkers, whoever it may be, right? You need to understand and acknowledge that this is really all about just objective analysis, and really asking yourself these questions about Why do I think this way? Who taught me this? What is the reason why I think this way? Is this something that my family always thought this way and then I just inherited, or did I read a book, or did I watch this news, media, or whatever it may be? Like, you have to question and reflect and think about, where did this level of thinking and belief come from? That's the biggest thing here, is the reflection aspect, and doing so from an objective perspective. Okay, don't judge, don't think, man, why am I thinking like this, why am I thinking negative? Just think about it and acknowledge it, all from an objective perspective. And that's really what's going to help you really separate yourself from those patterns, right? Because those are not you, they're just situations, things that are happening in loops, right? Because you have been living unconsciously. But that's all going to change moving forward. And then upgrade number 2, this is the void. The void is where the old identity dies. Whoops. Old identity dies and new one is born. Okay? New one is born. So this is where there's a lot of friction. It's almost like you're mourning the old version of yourself, right? And you're thinking, man, like, I can't believe I thought this way. I can't believe that, this person over here, this version of me has been acting this way, has been processing this way. And this is where you're just kind of in limbo. You're like, man, like, what is going on? Like, you realize all this information, all these loops that are happening, and then you step into the void and you're like, man, like, I can't believe that that's really how I was, or, how I was acting, the loops that were going on in my mind, right? That's a very key point now, because now you get to enter into the first steps, right? Almost like entering the porch of your new identity, right? You're in there and you're by yourself and you're just kind of like, wow, like, I cannot believe that this is how I have been. And where you're essentially having the front door there and you're in the porch and you're like, this door leads to my identity version 2.0, right? And sometimes it can be very sad here, right? Where you're just like, man, I can't believe I'm letting go of this person, like this version of me, right? Because identity is everything for us as humans, right? It's who we are and how we show up to the world. And if, like, you think about people that see themselves as a plumber, or see themselves as like a doctor, right? If somebody's been working in the field for like 20 plus years, 30 plus years as like let's say a doctor, and then all of a sudden they like retire and they quit or whatever it may be, they oftentimes are in limbo. Like, they don't really know who they are anymore, because their identity was around being a doctor, but now they're just kind of like just another person. So it's really important to just acknowledge this state, this point here, right? You're in limbo, you're in between versions of yourself, but it's always something that you need to do, right? Because each identity upgrade that you're doing, right? And I believe that you should have new identities or better versions of yourself each and every year, right? That you're constantly growing, evolving, and stepping into a newer and better version of yourself, right? Even if it's small, little, tiny identity shifts, right? Maybe your identity shifts from, thinking you can only make $100,000 a month to maybe the next year you think that you can make $200,000 a month, right? Like, there's always something that needs to be upgraded and that we should be working on. There's always a limbo, like the void, where you're stepping into that next version of yourself. And upgrade number 3, this is where you are designing your new identity. Okay? Now, this is the biggest unlock that people I see have when they are able to acknowledge and become aware of their current loops, their patterns, and then start to question themselves in terms of, like, where did this all come from? Like, why do I have these thinking patterns? Why do I have these loops going on in my mind? This is where you consciously are able to actually design your future identity. Like, that's the biggest thing here, is that you need to understand is that you have the ability to consciously upgrade your identity. Because if you don't design your identity, then guess what? The real world is going to design that for you, and it's often going to be unconsciously, and it's often going to be centered around fear, lack, and uncertainty, right? And you don't want to go that route. You want to be in the route of, hey, I'm consciously designing my reality myself because I'm aware of my thoughts, my patterns, and all these different loops that have been going on in my life, right? This is where you start asking yourself, who do I need to become to achieve what I want, right? You start asking yourself, the version of me 2.0, how is he thinking? How is she thinking? What are the things that are important to him or her, right? To them. How are they processing unfortunate situations? Are they getting shook up, right? Think about how you are showing up when something quote unquote bad happens, right? Maybe right now you're going through something and maybe you're thinking negatively about it. It's, affecting how you show up. It's affecting your work, your sleep, right? Think about how would the upgraded version of you, how would they be processing that? Would they acknowledge it and look at it objectively for what it is, right? Because especially when you think about emotions and how you currently, interpret emotions and negative things or just events that happen, and then the upgraded version of you, right? Because in all situations, there's two things that are always going on. There's the actual event itself, and then there's the thoughts around that event and where you're attaching meaning. So this whole upgrade here is really centered around you asking those questions. What is the person that has my identity 2.0, right? What are they doing? How are they thinking? How are they showing up in the world, right? And all of these different things are what are going to help you and allow you to see, right? Become aware of that next version of yourself so that you can start moving closer to it, right? Because again, the very first thing that you need to understand within all of this is awareness. You need to become aware of where you're at so you can get to where you want to be, right? And who you want to be. And upgrade number 4, this is where you are aligning action, okay, with identity. Okay? This is where everything comes together and there's congruency, there's alignment, where you are now moving from that identity. And this is truly how you get ahead of 99% of people. You act from the upgraded version of yourself, from that new identity. And this is where most people try to change their actions. They try to get these new habits. They try to do all these different techniques. But at the end of the day, if all of those things are being done with an old identity, then it's just all going to be temporary. It's not going to be permanent. It's just going to be something where, yeah, you maybe get a little bit of success in the beginning or it works for a while, but then there's that inner friction, there's that misalignment, right? And so in order to remove all of that and to be in full coherence, to be full alignment, is by simply doing things that upgraded identity version of yourself does. And here's something that I want you to think about. You think about, there's this new thing that's been going on in terms of identity, right? You think about identity dysmorphia, right? This is something that, a lot of people are going through, and, no politics here. At the end of the day, I'm all about do whatever you do as long as you're not hurting other people, okay? But there's actual people out there that are men and believe they're women, and women who believe they're men. Now, think about the conviction that they have, how they show up, like the actual true belief that they have that, hey, I may be biologically a man, but I, really see myself and identify as a woman, okay? But just think about the conviction behind that. And that's the kind of conviction that you need to have behind your new identity, right? That you want to step into is you need to have conviction. You need to have emotional conviction that you are who this person is, right? That's really the biggest thing here, is that becoming aware, acknowledging all the loops of your current identity, right? And then realizing how your future self thinks, acts, feels, and then stepping into that. And here's the ultimate truth bomb. Okay? We've gone through all of these different things here in terms of the perspectives of identity and what happens throughout these different stages and who is really kind of running the show. But here's the ultimate bomb drop here, okay? Reinvention isn't about becoming someone new. It's about becoming who you truly are. Truly are, okay? Now, think about this. Think about situations or times where there's friction in your decision making. You're looking to make a decision whether you want to hire somebody, fire somebody, take on a certain job, move to a certain location. If it doesn't feel right, then it's probably not part of your actual identity, right? Because oftentimes, and really just the majority of, us as humans, we grow up in a certain set of circumstances, beliefs, and interpretations of how the world should look. And so we do everything to appease our family, our friends, right? We go and get that medical degree. We go to college and we get into a certain area because our parents were doctors, our parents were, accountants or whatever it may be. And we're doing it to appease our family. And then, 10 to 15 years after being in that particular, subject or area, you start to question yourself like, man, like, is this really what I want to do? Like, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. And that's because we were choosing from the old identity, right? Because when you're choosing with the new identity, it shouldn't be any friction, any hesitation. It should feel like you are in alignment, like you're at ease, like you're removing heaviness from you because you're no longer doing something and acting in an identity that was never truly yours. At the end of the day, what you're really doing is you're just embodying who you truly are. And that's really how you get into the next version of yourself, right? It's purely realignment. Reinvention is remembering the version of you that life made you forget. And you're much more closer to reinvention than you think.